Welcome to Syntax, a Generative Introduction, 4th edition. My name is Andrew Carnie. I'm a professor of linguistics at the University of Arizona. I'm the author of your textbook, and I'll be leading you through this series of video tutorials. In the previous video, we talked about how we could create a construction that would have the two NPs that follow a ditransitive verb in a configuration where the first one C-commanded the second one. We did this by making use of technology that we've argued for elsewhere, that there is a voice phrase that introduces the agent, and by having that voice phrase take as a complement a VP, which introduces the theme. And the new thing that we added, or the two new things we added, was we put the goal in the specifier of this verb phrase. And we proposed there was a rule of short verb movement, which moved the V into the voice head in order to get the correct word order, gave Clay a book. This had the added advantage of it explained why both Clay and book are functioning as complements, because a book is a complement of gave in its base position, and Clay is in the specifier position of the VP, which is a complement of the voice head, which is where the verb ends up. So this is quite an explanatory little hypothesis about structure, but there are some things missing. So, for example, there's no explanation of how Clay gets its case. This is not a case position. And the argument licensing only sort of really works for Morag here. Well, in order to explain how Clay gets its case, we're first of all going to revisit how the theme here gets its case. Getting its case in this position as the complement to the main verb is a bit of an anomaly, because this is the only thing we've seen, the only position we've seen where case is complement rather than being licensed in the specifier of a functional head like this in this T structure. So I want to revisit the issues of case around objects. And then in the next video, we're going to look at how we get case on Clay. So in this video, we're going to rethink the case on the theme. The puzzle we're going to investigate is a phenomenon not found in English, but found in many languages of the world, called object shift. Let's start by looking at some Irish data. So Irish, as you know, is a VSO language. So normally the verb comes first in the sentence. But if we look at these sentences right here, and in particular focus on these embedded clauses, you'll notice there's no VSO order. The order, in fact, is subject, object, verb in this first sentence, and subject, verb, object in the second one. We'll come back to these sentences, C and D below later. So what's going on here? Well, what's key is that, in fact, these embedded clauses are non-finite clauses. And you'll recall that our analysis of VSO order involves movement of the verb to the T node. So these do not have a tense T. They have a non-finite form. And so you don't get V to T movement, which explains why the verb is not initial. But we still have an interesting puzzle that surrounds the position of the object relative to the verb. So we actually have two dialects of Irish here. One is Ulster Irish and the other is Munster Irish. And in Ulster Irish, it's the case that you always get in non-finite clauses object, verb, order. This tran marker shows up whenever the verb is transitive. Okay, now in Munster Irish, a different pattern sometimes shows up. You also can get the OV order, but you can get a different order where the verb comes before the object. So nahabercha is the object, and it's following the verb. But one thing you'll notice about this is there's actually a difference in form, which amounts to case. So in the first sentence, in Ulster Irish, you get accusative case, then the verb. In Munster Irish, you get the verb, and then the object is in the genitive case. It's not in the accusative. This is an interesting pattern because here we have an element with a structural case of accusative, and we find an alternation in position where it shows up with a different case. This pattern is replicated in all dialects of Irish when you compare different aspect markings. So in this first sentence, C here, or third sentence I mean, you will notice that we have object, verb, order, both of which follow this perfect marker. This perfect marker is what's known as the after perfect. It means roughly just, has just, is what it means. We don't have that aspect in English, but at least in most standard dialects of English. But what's critical for us is we have the object, and the object appears before the verb. Contrast that with the sentence in D, which is in a different aspect. It's in the progressive aspect, and you'll notice that the object follows the verb, and it's in the same form as the Munster Irish post-verbal object here. It's in the genitive case. So before the verb, we get accusative case. After the verb, we get the genitive case. This is also a property specifically of literary Irish. You find in other dialects, sort of other registers of Irish, this might not be in the genitive case, but in the literary form, we get the genitive here. So we seem to have an alternation in position between a pre-verbal object, which is accusative, and a post-verbal object, which is in the genitive. Now, what should we take away from this particular alternation? Well, one possibility is that the different case markings that you find in the two different positions reflect a difference in where accusative case can be assigned. So one possibility is that the complement of the verb is not an accusative case position. So in Munster Irish, they solved this problem by putting the form in the genitive case, which is a kind of lexical or inherent case associated with the theme role when it's in this position. But Ulster Irish takes a different approach. In Ulster Irish, what you're doing is you're moving to a position where the element can take an accusative case. So remember, we already moved subjects so that they can get nominative case. So maybe what's happening in Irish here is we're moving objects from a post-verbal position, which is not a case position, into a pre-verbal position, which is a case position. That's reflected in these aspectual sentences as well. So in the progressive aspect, the verb precedes the object, and the object takes the genitive case. In the perfective aspect, by contrast, there's a position where the object can get an accusative case, and perhaps it has moved there from the post-verbal position. So movement here would look just like movement that we have in of subjects. So subjects move from a non-case position where they get their theta role to a case position. Well, here perhaps exactly the same thing is happening. In Ulster Irish, they get their theta role in the post-verbal position, and they move to a position where they can get accusative case. The key to this, actually, in Irish is this particular morpheme right here, which I have labeled tran here, but there's good evidence to suggest it's actually a morpheme that has been proposed for other languages called AgrOP, or object agreement. AgrOP, the evidence for AgrOP comes from lots of languages where in fact you find object agreement. There is no object agreement in Irish nor in English, but we can assimilate our analysis of what this particular particle is to that literature that proposes AgrOP. So here's what we're going to propose, that there is in fact a category AgrOP, or object agreement, that is associated with objects. And in particular, it's the position which is associated with accusative case. So this position right here is the position of accusative case. This position down here, which is the thematic position of the object, so this is the word "the sentence," it's in the position where the theme theta role is assigned, is not a case position. So what happens in Irish is you move this DP from its theta position, where it gets its theta role, to its case position, which is the specifier of AgrOP. So what does that mean for us? That means that the complement position of the verb is where the theme role is assigned. The specifier of AgrOP is where accusative case is assigned. The specifier of voice phrase is where the agent theta role is aligned. And I haven't drawn it in here, but the specifier of the TP is where nominative case is assigned. So we've separated and bifurcated theta role assignment from case assignment. But there is evidence that things sometimes do surface in their theta positions. So for example, with quantifier float in English, and perhaps even the subject position in VSO languages like Irish, that DP that sits in the specifier of the voice phrase gets its agent role here and stays there. In Munster Irish, the object gets its theta role here, and it takes a genitive case in this position, presumably because for some reason in this dialect, this position for accusative case isn't available. We can extend this to explain English. Now, this is quite a complicated tree, but it's made up of bits you've already seen. So let's just start off by looking up here. You've seen all of this before. We have a voice phrase which introduces the agent role in the specifier. We have some kind of relationship between voice and T. Let's not worry about that, so that's why I've indicated with a dotted line. That's either covert movement or affix lowering or some kind of selection. It doesn't matter. There's some kind of relationship there. And we know that this DP here doesn't get case in this position, so it's going to have to move up to the specifier of this TP where it gets nominative case and checks the EPP. Now we're going to claim that what just happened up here also happens down here, exactly parallel. So downstairs we have a DP, the window, and it gets its theta role from the verb root clean in this position. This is where it gets its theme role. But this is no longer a case position for us. We're now tying accusative case to this AgrOP morpheme. Okay, so accusative case is actually up here, just like nominative case is up here. And so we're going to move that DP into the specifier of AgrOP. This is where it would check accusative case. Now, in Irish, we have an overt AgrOP morpheme. We have that little A with the superscript L morpheme, and that's not present in English. But the position would be in exactly the same place. Now you'll say to yourself, wait a minute, this gets us the wrong order, because in English we don't say I the window clean, which is what is predicted by the tree we've drawn so far. It puts the order of window up here before the verb root. And obviously that's wrong. That's not the order that things appear in. But in the previous set of videos, when we were talking about double objects, we proposed an operation to get the right word order in sentences like give Michael the book, where we were proposing that give starts between Michael and book. And we do an operation of short verb movement, which moves the verb above the indirect object. Well, we can solve our problem with word order here exactly the same way. we'll start the verb down here inside the verb phrase, but we're going to move it through 2 hops of short verb movement into the voice head, and that will get it before the object again. So we've corrected the word order problem. This movement is, in fact, otherwise well motivated, right? This movement is exactly what we needed to get double object constructions. So this movement right here is expected. It happens in 2 hops for a reason, and that reason is the minimal link condition. The minimal link condition says you have to move to the first potential position, so the verb moves to AgrOP and then moves on its way up to voice just to meet the minimal link condition. But critically, this gets us our right word order. We've got the subject and the specifier of TP. Then we have the verb, which is undergone short verb movement, just as we need it to do in other cases. And then we have the shifted object, which appears in the specifier of AgrOP to get accusative case. The movements here are the same as what we would expect in Irish, except that in Irish you don't move the verb overtly, which is why you get that OV order. And it's actually possible that that's an analysis for OV orders more generally. Maybe in languages that have OV order, they have movement of the DP to the specifier of the AgrOP in order for you to get case, and they simply lack overt short verb movement. Okay, now let's talk about passives. We actually now have a much better explanation for why passives can't assign accusative case. In our old analysis, what we used to do was say that the passive verb form selected for a verb phrase that was minus accusative. That was what we call an ad hoc solution. It was stipulative. We simply said that the forms of the passive require that the verb phrase have this minus accusative feature. But there's a much more straightforward analysis if we propose AgrOP. So here's that analysis. We're going to claim that active verbs, which have which introduce an agent into their specifier, require that the following element be an AgrOP. So it selects for and chooses an AgrOP explicitly. That's the active form. This particular configuration has a name. In the literature on linguistics, it's called Bertsio's generalization. And Bertsio's generalization says things that have agents are allowed to assign accusative case. So verbs that have agents can assign accusative case. And that's specified right here in this theta grid. So this is Bertsio's generalization that these things go together. Now, passive, by contrast, has a completely different theta grid. First of all, be passive doesn't introduce an agent. That's one of the things that makes it passive. So there's no external theta role here. And secondly, be passive doesn't select for AgrOP, it selects directly for a verb phrase, which is going to be of the form participle to make sure that you've got the right embedded verb form. Now, why do passives not have accusative cases in their complements? It's because it's a verb phrase, not an AgrOP. And AgrOP is the thing that is critical for accusative case. So if we contrast our previous tree to a passive tree, what goes on in passive is the reason this verb doesn't assign accusative case is because there's no AgrOP here. The voice selects directly for VP instead of for AgrOP. And as a consequence, there is no there's no accusative case marking on this object. So the object has to look elsewhere for its case marking. Now, fortunately, in a passive, there's no agent here, so there's nothing that could possibly move into the specifier of TP in our normal way. But this DP has the option of moving there, because there's nothing to move there from the subject position, effectively the agent position. Our theme can move up here. And the reason it moves up here into the specifier of the TP is there is no AgrOP. That connects the dots for us. Accusative case is selected for by active voice, which means AgrO, but passive voice selects directly for verb phrases. That's a nice explanatory theory. In the next video, we're now going to return to the issue of how goals get their case. And we're going to use a very similar set of techniques that we have used for explaining actives and passives and object shift.